I think the story of Fornlândia is usually told, it's in its most powerful versions, or hegemonic versions, should I say, it's imagined as a little homunculus in the brain of Henry Ford that just came out as Ford's dream and then was doomed to failure. I think that there's other ways of understanding this rather than the success of an already conceived dream. But when we talk about materialities, it could be immaterialities too, but they're contingent, place-based, granular, rather than coming out full-blown from a particular vision. The visions become broken and historical from the way that they come together and form this significant patch. The term patch, and which I think may be a problem in translation, I can't remember, is I'm referring to an ecological assemblage of plants and animals that happen to be there in a particular place, and that by their sheer juxtaposition, the historical contingencies of being in a place, that they have effects on each other, and whether material or immaterial, they come together and create something new. So the reason that Fornlândia cannot be considered just a little plan, a little dream of Henry Ford, has to do with what was going on in Brazil as politicians were trying to attract him or working against him, as the governor of the province was repelling or helping, as the guy he hired as the manager got involved in his own crazy plans, that all of these things come together and produce the particular nature of the environmental catastrophe as well as the economic catastrophe that happened in Fornlândia. And that rather than thinking of it as the difference as material versus immaterial, because all of that local machinations had both material and immaterial aspects. I'd like to think of it as how we begin with the traction of events and organisms and the presences in a particular space and history that come together and create a scene in which ruins of the Anthropocene emerge, and it's our job to figure out what to do about them. I think there's really a lot that we have to learn with and from non-human beings. Two aspects strike me right away that are connected with each other. And the first is that they help us overcome the kind of blindness that we have because of our hubris, because of our false pride, and that we have to live with them, that we're part of the same world they are. In fact, you could say we're kin with all of these other plants and animals and fungi and other things. For many years, humans have had the conceit that all animals, in fact, all beings on Earth, are autonomous and independent, that we live only by our own wits, that we reproduce the same, and that our relationship with other beings is either eat them or be eaten by them. That whole fields of biology were organized on that kind of principle of the independence, the autonomy of each kind of organism. That fungi, for example, don't work that way at all. Fungi are often interdependent with other organisms. For example, trees, which they nurture and are nurtured by. That the kinds of lessons that we learn from fungi are about the hubris of our idea that we live as independent beings, that the more we learn about other organisms, the more we learn that humans too are completely dependent on other kinds of beings to digest our food for us, to make us who we are. And so that's the first piece of the lesson. The more we learn about the ecology, the more we see the interdependence of species, how we can't actually live without each other. That there was a fantasy in the 1950s that's come back that humans would feel fine about destroying the planet because they could go off in a rocket ship by themselves and go live on another planet. But in fact, if you think of all of the fungi, the bacteria, the plants, and the animals that we would have to bring on that rocket ship, we'd have to pack the whole planet into the rocket ship. So it really isn't going to work out. This is the planet we have to fix. And we live on that planet together with other species, and we're dependent on them. This is the second piece of what we have to learn, is that we are completely dependent. There's a famous story about what happened in China during the Great Leap Forward in the 1950s, when there was a campaign to kill off the sparrows because they were eating the grain. Then people wanted to eat the grain. They didn't want sparrows to eat it for them. So they killed millions and millions of small birds. And a plague of insects came along because there were no more birds to eat them. That this kind of story of interdependence is with us all the time. Indeed, as it said in the question, we might learn a lot from thinking with Indigenous peoples who have argued for the kinship between humans and other beings on Earth. A North American Indigenous person said something like about a people in the Midwest in the United States, Indigenous people, that he said something like, the decline of the sturgeon was the decline of the sturgeon people. So he's referring to the great fish that used to live in many freshwater bodies of water, like great rivers, but all of the kinds of changes that the settlers brought made it very hard for these sturgeons to survive. And the sturgeon people, that is the people who were kin to the sturgeon, declined alongside the death of their kin. And in that sense, we're all in the position of the sturgeon people, that is completely dependent on our non-human kin, and are really in trouble if we continue to kill them all off. Maybe a place to start is with capitalism, that system that makes it possible for investors in very distant places to destroy landscapes and peoples and plants and animals with no sense of responsibility at all. It's useful for us to imagine that, to see that as a system, to see its systematic categories. But in a way, we don't want to take that understanding of its structural features too far. This is where that concept of patchiness really helps me, that if capitalism is patchy, then we have some sense of where to look for habitability as well as inhabitability. Let me give an example before we let Pedro translate of what I mean about the patchiness of capitalism, in particular, the interpenetration of capitalist value processes and non-capitalist value processes. And I just think about milk and what it takes to produce milk. And it partly comes out of cows, and cows eat grass, which of course has its own metabolic processes, but inside the body of the cow, there's all those fungi and bacteria that are digesting the grass for the cow, which the cow, like us, is not very good at digesting grass, but the bacteria and the fungi digest the grass, and that translates into the cow, and then it has this reproductive fluid, which we then take as milk. And the thing is, not a single capitalist on earth can produce milk. That milk can only be produced by the cow, not by the capitalist. So the capitalist, in order to start a commercial dairy, has to claim the process of a non-capitalist process, that has to claim that and turn it into a commodity. So of course, when we go to the store, milk is already a commodity. We pay for it, we take it home, we drink it. But in fact, it wasn't produced by anything except the cow. I think so much of capitalism is like that, this interpenetration of capitalist and non-capitalist kinds of modes of production. And once we see that, there's an opening. Starting in the 1970s, a new onslaught of even the most out-of-the-way places started from corporations and national governments. And today, it's hard for me to think of any place that's outside capitalism. And yet, scattered through all the places that capitalism has a hold in certain ways, there's fragments of possibility. A colleague of mine, Zachary Capel, uses the term Holocene fragments. I like that term very much. The Holocene is the geological epoch of the last 11,000 years in which humans and non-humans continued many of these evolutionary long-term relationships of interdependence with each other. I think one of the jobs that all of us need to do is to notice those Holocene fragments that are around us and work really hard to make sure that they get to stay there, that we can't afford to lose all those Holocene fragments. So one of the responsibilities I think we have is to cherish and just keep others away. I mean, others in the sense of corporations and the kinds of governments that want to dismantle these places. So to guard, in some sense, the long-term interspecies relations that can continue in those Holocene fragments. This is also true, I think, about human labor practices and our relationships with non-humans, that there are non-capitalist pieces that we might want to build upon and cherish. J.K. Gibson Graham they wrote about non-capitalist practices and spaces. And for me, they're on the border of capitalism. So they don't escape entirely from capitalist influences and subsumptions. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't worth paying attention to, so that the kinds of human relations involved, as the ones that I tried to talk about in describing mushroom picking, that some of these have non-capitalist features that might be worth appreciating and holding on to, even as we recognize their subsumption into the capitalist system. I might try and answer that question in relation to a question that's on the paper, but that we skipped, which was the term Anthropocene itself and whether there's a universal humanity that goes with it. So the brief answer to that question is that for me, I use the term Anthropocene despite its many, many flaws, because it's a meeting place for people across disciplines, across approaches, across ways of life, to have a discussion about the terrible environmental problems of our time. It's that meeting place, and it's our responsibility to pull in questions of social justice, of the difference between people of color and white people, of settlers and indigenous people, of poor people and elites, that those kinds of questions are up to us in that conversation about the Anthropocene to draw in. That right now we have the privilege of the fact that the geologists haven't decided whether this is their term or not. And so at this moment, at least, the term belongs to all of us, and we can make it do work that perhaps it wasn't originally intended to do. So I'm throwing in my oar to do that work. Feral Atlas is a piece of that work, of trying to show what's possible to make the term Anthropocene work in a way that is a little different than some of its hegemonic kinds of usages. We do that work in part by bringing in scholars from many kinds of disciplines, as well as people who aren't scholars, Indigenous elders, or people speaking of their experiences. But all of them have to do with how they have experienced the world. They have a direct observation, empirical basis. And yet we see how they can work together to constitute an Anthropocene that's both planetary and particular. So one of the ways that Feral Atlas is trying to draw us into new forms of collectivity is by drawing together people with many kinds of experiences with the natural world and bringing their perspectives into a common conversation. Another of the ways that Feral Atlas tries to build collectivities is through refiguring the relation between humans and non-humans as we both think about history and the future. That Feral Atlas shows us how non-humans are part of making history. They're historical actors in the same way that humans are. And Feral Atlas requires us to reformulate our sense of history and action to bring non-humans into it. Now, some of those collectivities of humans and non-humans are really dreadful, that if we can't figure out how to stop them, they'll kill us all. Just learning to recognize those is in itself a new form of collectivity, working against those, that we can think about our allies, human and non-human, in part because we're paying attention to the details of the terrible and terrifying things that are going on. So through grasping that sense that non-humans are part of our collectivities, we can also make choices about which non-humans it makes sense for us to draw into our sense of allies versus those that we might need to work against to try and block. I think one of the, I'm sure you all know that the period since 1950 is sometimes called the Great Acceleration, when all the curves of growth and population and carbon dioxide and global warming started going up like crazy. It's also a period when fertility in all its different forms was glamorized as the only way that anything good could happen in the world. It was going to be through growth and production and fertility, and that the over-fertilization of the soils, which came along with the Green Revolution, and the use of plants that could only grow as crops if you poured fertilizer and insecticides on them. And of course, that fertilizer flowed out into the rivers and to the oceans and caused all kinds of ecological damage. That the glamorization of fertility has brought us some of the problems that we're in, that in fact, many plants, and certainly fungi, grow in less than fertile places. I've started to re-examine even everything I know about crops. Maybe every crop doesn't need the amount of fertilization that a commercial farmer throws on it, that many of crops do just fine with much lower levels of nitrogen and phosphorus. That I did my first field work in a part of Indonesia where people planted rice on the very steep slopes of hills, and it was a shifting cultivation situation where after a few years they let the forest regrow. And I think agronomists for many years thought it was because there was a lack of fertility. And then they found out the only reason that they moved on was because the weeds had gotten so tall and there's a whole lot of work to cut them down. So it was the regrowth of forest species that stopped people from growing their plots of crops there anymore and allowed them to recycle into the forest before they use them again. So we overestimate growth and fertility and multiplication. We think that's where life is. And I think it's time for a re-examination of all those growth ideologies. And this tree that you mentioned might be a fantastic icon for the ways that perhaps a more sustainable kind of living, which doesn't require pouring on chemical fertilizers into all of our lives, which doesn't require filling up all the gaps of the world with cities and developments. Perhaps those visions of growth are not where we should, how we should be thinking, but instead, perhaps even degrowth, perhaps even how to live in stony, dry soils. My first instinct in thinking about that image is that we shouldn't compare the human body with the dancing of the human body, say, with the dancing of other species, although other species dance. But instead, imagine our bodies dancing together. It's the humans collecting mushrooms that's a dance, and that we need to draw the interspecies relationship into our sense of the body and its dances, that we need to pull and make an inclusive space where these dances are both our bodies and the kinds of beings that we have relationships with that form part of perhaps our extended body. I feel the same way about environmental justice. Many people have brought it up, sometimes making a parallel between the rights of an animal, for example, and the rights of a human being. For me, the parallel is not the most helpful way to bring it in, but instead to imagine an environmental justice in which humans and non-humans live together, and a more inclusive justice in which humans are part of this world in which non-humans are dancing as part of some of the same dances that we enact together. A couple words about writing. The thing about writing for me is really, it is like a musical form, that I write because I can hear the music of it. And when my students ask me how to write, I can tell them something about what an outline is, and you have to have an argument and support. But the real thing that makes it is the music, is that sense of the writing singing in your head. And maybe that's why I'm not so drawn to trying to use professional jargon to just debate with inside, because it doesn't make very good music. So the music of it is like the human voice, a way of reaching out, perhaps even across species, if you think of it that way, to communicate through resonance, melody, all of those things that we expect of music. And I've tried a lot of experiments with writing. Feral Atlas is probably the most radical in terms of drawing in the arts and trying to include some poetry. Please do explore for the poetry in Feral Atlas, because of a last minute omission from the software person. It's hidden, it's very deeply hidden. But if you look, you will find quite a bit of poetry in there and a little bit of music, not as enough. But there's a sense in which the writing was meant to inform and motivate and embrace all these other forms of the arts and of the sounds and the sights. Maybe that's at least a starting place on the writing. I feel so honored that all of you got together here for this group occasion, but alas, I actually have to leave at this point.